The lantern oil spilled across the hay-strewn floor of the barn like liquid death, and Lila Norton knew she had only seconds before the advancing flames would consume everything in their path, including her. It was December of 1883, and the blizzard that had descended upon Reno, Nevada, 2 days earlier, showed no signs of relenting. The wind howled outside the barn walls with such ferocity that it seemed to shake the very foundation of the structure, while inside, the fire spread with impossible speed, feeding on the dry winter hay that had been stored for the livestock. Lila had been checking on the horses when the lantern hook, weakened by rust and age, had given way. The glass had shattered against the wooden post, and within moments, the entire western wall was ablaze. She ran toward the main doors, her boots slipping on the icy patches that had formed where snow had blown through the cracks. The metal latch burned her fingers when she touched it, and she cried out in pain, pulling back. The heat was already intense enough that the metal had conducted the fire's warmth. She tried wrapping her shawl around her hand to try again, but the doors would not budge. Something had jammed them from the outside, perhaps a snow drift pushed by the relentless wind or debris carried by the storm. The smoke was thickening, black and acrid, filling her lungs and making her cough violently. Lila stumbled backward, her eyes streaming tears. The horses in their stalls were screaming in terror, their hooves thundering against the wooden barriers. She moved to release them, throwing open the stall gates one by one, but the animals were too panicked to understand she was trying to help. They reared and kicked, their eyes rolling white with fear. Through the growing roar of the flames, Lila heard another sound, something that cut through even the storm and the fire. Hoofbeats. They were coming fast, getting closer. She screamed for help, her voice raw and desperate, not knowing if anyone could possibly hear her over the chaos of fire and wind. Wade Robbins had been riding hard through the blizzard for the better part of an hour when he saw the orange glow on the horizon. At first he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, that the cold and snow were making him see things that were not there. But as his horse crested the hill overlooking the Norton ranch, there was no mistaking it. The barn was engulfed in flames, the fire so bright against the white landscape that it seemed almost unnatural, a piece of summer hell dropped into the winter wilderness. He had been on his way back to his own property when the storm had forced him to seek shelter. The Norton place was the closest ranch, and he had hoped to wait out the worst of the blizzard in their barn before continuing home. Wade had known the Norton family for 3 years, ever since they had settled in the area. Thomas Norton had been a good man, though he had died the previous spring from pneumonia, leaving his wife Margaret and their daughter Lila to run the ranch alone. Margaret had passed just 2 months ago, and now Lila, barely 22 years old, was trying to hold everything together by herself. Wade was 26, a cowboy who had worked various ranches throughout Nevada and had recently saved enough to purchase a small piece of land of his own. He had spoken to Lila a handful of times at town gatherings and church socials, always finding her intelligent and kind, with a strength that seemed to radiate from her despite her small stature. She had dark hair that she wore in a practical braid, and eyes the color of autumn leaves, warm and golden brown. Now, seeing the barn aflame, his only thought was whether anyone was inside. He urged his horse forward, down the hill and toward the inferno. The snow was deep, coming up past his horse's knees in places, but the animal was strong and pushed through. The wind fought against them, throwing ice and snow into Wade's face with such force that it felt like being struck with tiny knives. He pulled his scarf up over his nose and mouth, squinting against the assault. As he drew closer, He could see that the main house appeared untouched by the fire, though the barn was nearly consumed. Then he heard it, a woman's scream cutting through the storm. His blood ran cold. Someone was inside. Wade did not hesitate. He pulled his horse up near the barn doors and dismounted, his boots sinking into snow that came up to his shins. The heat from the fire was intense, even through the blizzard, creating a bizarre sensation of burning and freezing simultaneously. He could see that the main doors were blocked, a combination of snow drift and a fallen beam that must have been dislodged by the fire. "Hold on," he shouted, though he doubted anyone inside could hear him. "I am coming." He threw his weight against the doors once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th attempt, something gave way, and the doors burst inward. A wall of smoke and heat hit him so hard he staggered backward, his eyes instantly burning. Through the haze, he could see flames covering most of the interior, climbing the walls and racing across the ceiling beams. The structure would not hold much longer. "Where are you?" he shouted into the inferno. "Here." The voice came from somewhere to his left, weak and choked with smoke. "I cannot get to the door." Wade pulled his scarf over his mouth and plunged into the barn. The heat was overwhelming, pressing against him from all sides. He could feel it through his heavy winter coat, through his gloves, searing his exposed skin. The smoke was so thick he could barely see 3 feet ahead of him. He moved in the direction of the voice, one arm raised to shield his face from the flames that seemed to reach out for him like grasping fingers. A burning beam crashed down not 5 feet from where he stood, sending up a shower of sparks and embers. Wade jumped back, his heart hammering in his chest. The structure was collapsing. They had minutes at most. "Keep talking," he called out. "I need to find you. I am by the far stalls." Lila's voice came again, and he could hear the fear in it, raw and desperate. "The horses would not leave, and now the way is blocked." Wade pushed forward, his boots crunching on debris and ash. The cold from outside was battling the heat from the fire, creating pockets of steam where melting snow met burning wood. He stumbled over something, nearly falling, and looked down to see it was a saddle that had fallen from its rack. Then he saw her. Lila was pressed against the far wall, trapped between a fallen support beam and a pile of burning hay. The beam had not fallen directly on her, but it blocked her path to the door, and the flames were closing in from 3 sides. Her face was smudged with soot, her eyes wide with terror, but when she saw him, something like hope flashed across her features. "Wade." Her voice was hoarse from the smoke. "What are you doing here?" "Saving you," he said simply. He assessed the situation quickly. The beam was too large to move, still burning at one end. He would have to find another way to get her out. "Can you climb?" She looked up at the walls, which were starting to bow inward from the heat. "The walls will not hold. They do not have to hold for long." Wade looked around desperately for something, anything he could use. His eyes fell on several wooden planks that had not yet caught fire, probably too wet from the snow that had been blowing into the barn. "I am going to make a path. When I say run, you run straight for me. Do not stop, do not look back. Do you understand?" Lila nodded, coughing violently. She had torn a piece of her skirt and held it over her mouth and nose, but it was doing little good against the thick smoke. Wade grabbed the planks and began laying them across the burning debris, creating a narrow bridge through the flames. The wood was damp enough that it did not immediately catch fire, but he knew it would not last long. He worked with desperate speed, his hands blistering even through his gloves from handling the wood that was rapidly heating. "Now," he shouted. "Run now." Lila did not hesitate. She hiked up her skirts and ran across the makeshift bridge, her feet moving fast despite the smoke and heat. Wade met her halfway, grabbing her around the waist as a section of the ceiling gave way behind her, crashing down exactly where she had been standing moments before. He half carried, half dragged her toward the door, both of them coughing and gasping for clean air. The smoke was so thick now he could not see the exit, but he knew it was there, could feel the cold wind blowing in through the opening. They stumbled forward, Wade's arm tight around Lila's waist, her weight leaning heavily against him as her legs threatened to give out. Then they were through the door, falling into the snow outside. The cold air hit them like a physical blow, shocking after the intense heat. Wade dragged Lila several yards from the barn, away from the flames, before they both collapsed into the deep snow, gasping and coughing. Behind them, the barn gave a final, groaning cry and collapsed inward, the roof caving in and sending a massive plume of sparks and ash spiraling up into the storm. The fire hissed and crackled as snow fell upon it, the blizzard finally beginning to do what no human effort could have, slowly dampening the flames. Lila was shaking violently, whether from cold or shock or both, Wade could not tell. He pulled off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, even though he was now left in only his shirt and vest in the midst of a blizzard. Her face was pale, her lips tinged blue, and her breathing came in short, shallow gasps. "We need to get you inside," he said, helping her to her feet. "Can you walk?" She nodded weakly, but when she tried to take a step, her legs buckled. Wade caught her before she could fall and, without asking permission, lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, and he realized with concern that she had probably been struggling to feed herself properly while trying to keep the ranch running alone through the early winter. He carried her to the main house, pushing through the deep snow, his horse following behind them. The wind was brutal, tearing at his clothes and exposed skin, but he barely felt it. All his focus was on getting Lila somewhere warm and safe. The door to the house was unlocked, and Wade kicked it open with his boot. Inside it was cold, not much warmer than outside, but at least they were out of the wind. He set Lila down gently on a chair near the fireplace, which held only dead ashes. "I need to get a fire going," he said, already moving to gather wood from the stack beside the hearth. "Where are your blankets?" "Upstairs," Lila managed to say between coughs. "The chest in my room." Wade got the fire started quickly, his cold fingers fumbling only slightly with the matches. Once the flames were catching, he hurried upstairs and found the bedroom that was clearly Lila's. It was simple and neat, with a quilt-covered bed and a large chest at its foot. He grabbed every blanket he could find, along with the quilt from the bed, and carried them all downstairs. Lila had not moved from where he had left her. Her eyes were closed, her breathing still labored. Wade wrapped the blankets around her, layering them thickly, then removed her snow-soaked boots and began rubbing her feet, trying to restore circulation. "Lila," he said firmly, "stay awake, look at me." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "I am so tired." "I know, but you need to stay awake for now. You took in a lot of smoke." He continued rubbing her feet, then moved to her hands, which were ice-cold and trembling. "Talk to me. Tell me what happened." "The lantern," she said weakly. "It fell. I tried to get out, but the doors were stuck. I tried to free the horses, but they would not go." "The horses got out," Wade assured her, though he had not actually seen them. He hoped they had escaped when he had opened the doors, but there was no way to know for certain in the storm. "You did everything you could." The fire was growing stronger now, radiating warmth into the cold room. Wade pulled a chair close to Lila and sat down, still holding her hands in his, rubbing them gently to warm them. She was watching him through half-closed eyes, and he could see the exhaustion and pain written across her face. "Why were you out here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "In this storm?" I was heading home from town when the blizzard hit, Wade explained. I was hoping to shelter in your barn until it passed. I saw the fire from the hill. You saved my life. Tears began to track down her soot-stained cheeks. I thought I was going to die in there. I could not breathe, could not think. Everything was so hot and the smoke was everywhere. You are safe now, Wade said gently, reaching up to wipe the tears from her face with his thumb. You are going to be fine. But even as he said it, he knew their situation was far from fine. They were trapped in a house in the middle of a blizzard with limited supplies. The barn was destroyed, which meant no shelter for livestock and no stored feed. The horses, if they had survived, were scattered in the storm, and Lila needed medical attention for smoke inhalation and possible burns. As if reading his thoughts, Lila said, "The storm. How long will it last?" "I do not know," Wade admitted. "Could be hours, could be days. Blizzards like this are unpredictable." He looked toward the window, where snow was piling up against the glass. "We will need to stay put until it passes. Do you have food and water?" "Some," Lila said. "There is a root cellar out back with preserves and vegetables." "I have been trying to ration everything to make it through the winter." Wade's heart ached at that. She had been out here alone, struggling to survive, and no one had known. "Why did you not ask for help? The neighbors, the people in town, someone would have helped you." Lila's expression hardened slightly, a stubborn pride showing through her exhaustion. "I do not need charity. This is my family's ranch. My father worked himself to death building it, and my mother died trying to hold on to it. I will not give up just because things are hard." "There is a difference between giving up and accepting help," Wade said quietly. "No one can run a ranch alone, especially not through a Nevada winter." "I was managing," Lila insisted, though the words rang hollow even to her own ears. "You nearly died tonight," Wade pointed out, his voice gentle but firm. "What would have happened to the ranch then?" Lila had no answer for that. She looked away, more tears sliding down her cheeks. Wade felt like a brute for pressing the point when she was already so vulnerable, but someone needed to make her see reason. "I am sorry," he said after a moment. "That was unkind. You have been through enough tonight without me lecturing you." "No," Lila said softly. "You are right. I have been stubborn and foolish. I just did not want to admit that I could not do it alone. My parents could do it, so why could I not?" "Your parents had each other," Wade reminded her. "No one is meant to face this life alone." They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howling wind outside. Wade kept the fire fed, and gradually the room grew warmer. Color began to return to Lila's face, and her shivering eased. She coughed periodically, harsh hacking coughs that made Wade wince, but her breathing seemed to be getting easier. "I should check on your burns," Wade said, remembering her cry when she had tried to open the barn doors. "May I see your hands?" Lila extended her hands reluctantly, and Wade carefully unwrapped them from the blankets. Her palms were red and blistered where she had touched the hot metal latch. He went to the kitchen and found a basin, which he filled with cool water from a bucket near the door. The water had a thin layer of ice on top, which he broke through before returning to Lila. "This might hurt," he warned, gently placing her hands in the cool water. Lila hissed in pain but did not pull away. "Do you have any salve or ointment?" "In the cabinet," she said, nodding toward a small wooden cabinet near the kitchen. "My mother made it. Lavender and beeswax." Wade found the jar and brought it back. After a few minutes, he carefully removed Lila's hands from the water and patted them dry with a clean cloth before applying the salve gently to the burns. His touch was tender, careful not to cause more pain than necessary. "You are good at this," Lila observed, watching him work. "I have had my share of injuries over the years," Wade said with a slight smile. "You learn to take care of yourself when you work alone." "Do you work alone?" Lila asked. "You said you were heading home. Do you have a ranch?" "Just a small piece of land," Wade said. "About 40 acres, 5 miles north of here. I have been building it up slowly, doing odd jobs to earn money for supplies and livestock. It is not much yet, but it is mine." "That must be satisfying," Lila said, "building something that is yours." "It is," Wade agreed. "Though I will admit it gets lonely sometimes. It is a lot of work for one person." "I know the feeling," Lila said with a rueful smile. Wade finished bandaging her hands with strips of clean cloth he found in a drawer. "There. That should help with the healing. You will need to keep them clean and change the bandages daily." "Thank you," Lila said, "for everything. I do not know how I can ever repay you." "You do not owe me anything," Wade said firmly. "I did what anyone would have done." "But you almost died doing it," Lila pointed out. "You ran into a burning building in the middle of a blizzard to save someone you barely know. That is not something that anyone would do. That is something extraordinary." Wade felt his face warm, and not from the fire. "I know you well enough to know that you did not deserve to die in that barn." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that had not been there before. Lila felt her heart skip in her chest, a sensation that had nothing to do with smoke inhalation or fear. She had noticed Wade before, of course. How could she not? He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that fell across his forehead. His eyes were a striking blue-gray, like storm clouds, and when he smiled, which was rare, it transformed his entire face. But she had never really looked at him before, not like this. Now, sitting close to him in the firelight, she saw the kindness in his eyes, the gentle way he handled her injured hands, the concern written across his features. This was a good man, she realized, perhaps one of the best she had ever known. The wind rattled the windows, reminding them of the storm still raging outside. Wade stood and went to look out, peering through the snow-covered glass. "It is getting worse," he said. "The snow is drifting up against the house. We may be here for a while. What about your horse?" Lila asked, suddenly concerned. "We cannot leave him out in that." "I will need to bring him into the house," Wade said, already moving toward the door. "It is not ideal, but it is better than leaving him to freeze." He put his coat back on, which had been drying near the fire, and went back out into the storm. The cold hit him like a wall, taking his breath away. His horse was still standing near the house, head down against the wind, covered in a thick layer of snow. Wade grabbed the reins and led the animal toward the door, coaxing it up the steps and into the house. It was cramped with a horse in the main room, but at least the animal would survive. Wade removed the saddle and bridle, then used a blanket to rub down the horse's coat, removing as much snow and moisture as possible. The horse seemed grateful for the warmth, nickering softly and nudging Wade's shoulder with its nose. "I am sorry for the intrusion," Wade said to Lila with an apologetic smile, "but I did not think you would want me to let him freeze." "Of course not," Lila said. "We will make do." They spent the rest of the evening trying to make the best of their situation. Wade went down to the root cellar and brought up supplies, finding enough food for several days if they were careful. Lila, despite her exhaustion and injuries, insisted on helping to prepare a simple meal of bread, cheese, and preserved vegetables. They ate sitting by the fire, the warmth gradually seeping into their bones. As night deepened and the storm continued to rage, they talked. Wade told Lila about his childhood in Wyoming, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 16 and making his way alone ever since. He spoke of the ranches he had worked, the places he had seen, the dreams he had of building something permanent and lasting. Lila, in turn, shared memories of her parents, of growing up on the ranch, of the love and laughter that had once filled this house. She spoke of her father's determination to make the ranch succeed despite the harsh land, of her mother's gentle strength, of the grief that had settled over everything after their deaths. "I feel like I am letting them down," she admitted in a quiet voice. "They worked so hard for this place, and I am losing it piece by piece. The barn was the last straw. I do not know how I will rebuild. I do not have the money, and without shelter for the animals, I cannot keep livestock through the winter." "You have options," Wade said gently. "You could sell the land, move to town, start fresh somewhere else." "No," Lila said immediately, then softened her tone. "I am sorry. I know that would be the practical thing to do, but this is my home. This is all I have left of my family. I cannot just walk away from it." Wade understood that feeling all too well. He had felt the same way about his own small piece of land, the determination to build something that would last, that would mean something. It was why he had worked himself nearly to exhaustion, why he took every job he could find, why he saved every penny. "Then we find another way," he said. "We?" Lila looked at him in surprise. Wade felt his face warm again. He had not meant to say that, had not meant to insert himself so directly into her life. But now that the word was out there, he found he did not want to take it back. "If you want help," he said carefully, "I could offer it. Not charity," he added quickly when he saw her expression shift. "A partnership. You have land but need labor and expertise. I have time and skills but limited resources. We could help each other." Lila was quiet for a long moment, studying him in the firelight. "Why would you do that? What do you get out of it, honestly?" Wade ran a hand through his hair, trying to find the right words. "I am tired of being alone. I am tired of struggling by myself to build something that seems to take forever. And I would rather help someone I respect keep their family's legacy than watch the land go to waste or fall into the hands of some speculator who does not care about it." "You barely know me," Lila pointed out, though her voice was softer now, thoughtful rather than defensive. "I know enough," Wade said. "I know you are strong and determined. I know you loved your parents and honor their memory. I know you would rather risk your life trying to save horses than abandon them to the fire. That tells me what kind of person you are." Lila felt tears prick her eyes again. She was exhausted, emotionally and physically drained, and his words touched something deep inside her. For months she had been alone, struggling without anyone to turn to, too proud to ask for help. And now here was this man, this near stranger who had risked his life to save her, offering her a lifeline without asking for anything in return. "I do not know what to say," she admitted. "You do not have to say anything tonight," Wade said. "The storm will keep us here for at least another day. Think about it. If you decide you want my help, we can discuss the details. If not, then when the weather clears, I will go on my way and you will never have to see me again." But even as he said it, Wade found the thought of never seeing Lila again surprisingly painful. Something had shifted between them tonight, something he had not expected. He had always thought her pretty and admirable from a distance. But now, having spent these hours with her, talking and learning her story, he found himself drawn to her in a way that went beyond simple attraction. She was brave and stubborn and determined, yes, but she was also vulnerable and hurting and desperately trying to hold herself together. He wanted to be the person who helped her, who stood beside her and made sure she did not have to face everything alone anymore. As the fire burned low and the hour grew late, they arranged sleeping spaces as comfortably as they could. Wade insisted that Lila take the upstairs bedroom while he would sleep downstairs near the fire to keep it fed through the night. The horse would have to stay in the main room, but it seemed content enough to stand near the dying fire. Before Lila went upstairs, she paused and turned back to Wade. "Thank you," she said again. "Not just for saving my life, but for everything else. For being kind when you did not have to be. For treating me like a person instead of a helpless woman who needs to be rescued and then dismissed." "You are not helpless," Wade said. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met." Lila smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes despite her exhaustion. "Good night, Wade." "Good night, Lila." She climbed the stairs slowly, her body aching from the ordeal. Wade watched until she disappeared from view, then turned back to the fire, adding another log and settling into a chair wrapped in blankets. Sleep was a long time coming. He kept replaying the events of the night, seeing over and over again the moment when he had first spotted the burning barn, hearing Lila's screams through the smoke, feeling the terror when he thought he might not reach her in time. He had come so close to losing her before he even really knew her. The thought made something clench in his chest, a feeling he had not experienced in years. He had been alone for so long, focused solely on survival and building his future, that he had forgotten what it felt like to care about someone else, to worry about their well-being beyond the general concern any decent person would feel. This was different. This was personal. And it had happened so fast he barely understood it himself. Upstairs, Lila lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the wind howl around the house. Her hands throbbed beneath the bandages, and her throat was raw from the smoke, but those discomforts were distant compared to the tumult of emotions swirling through her mind. Wade Robbins had saved her life tonight. But more than that, he had offered her hope when she had been ready to give up. He had looked at her not with pity or condescension, but with respect and understanding. He had seen her struggle, and instead of judging her for her pride or her failures, he had offered partnership. She barely knew him, that was true. But sometimes you could know the important things about a person very quickly. She knew he was brave, running into fire and storm to save a life. She knew he was kind, treating her injuries with gentle hands and speaking to her with compassion. She knew he was honest, offering help without pretending it was anything other than what it was. And she knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that she wanted to accept his offer. Not just because she needed the help, though she did, but because she wanted to know him better. She wanted to spend more time with him, to hear him talk in that low, measured voice, to see the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. It was foolish, she told herself. She had just met him, really met him, only hours ago. But her heart did not seem to care about logic or practicality. Her heart only knew that something had sparked to life tonight, something warm and bright in the darkness of her grief and loneliness. The next morning dawned gray and cold, with the storm still raging outside. Wade woke early, stiff from sleeping in the chair, and immediately set about rebuilding the fire. The house was frigid, and he could see his breath in the air. The horse was lying down near the dying embers, and it lifted its head when Wade moved, watching him with large, gentle eyes. "Good morning to you too," Wade said softly, running a hand along the animal's neck. "Sorry about the accommodations." He heard footsteps on the stairs and turned to see Lila descending slowly, wrapped in a thick shawl over her nightdress and a dressing gown. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, dark and wavy, and despite the pallor of her face and the shadows under her eyes, Wade thought she looked beautiful. "How are you feeling?" he asked, moving to help her down the last few steps. "Sore," Lila admitted. "My throat hurts and my hands are painful, but I am alive, which is more than I had any right to expect last night." "You have every right to expect to survive," Wade said firmly. "Come sit by the fire. I will make some coffee if you tell me where to find it." They spent the morning in quiet domestic comfort, preparing breakfast and tending to necessary tasks. The storm showed no signs of abating, and the snow was piled so high against the windows on one side of the house that it nearly blocked out the light. They were well and truly trapped, but neither of them seemed to mind as much as they might have expected. Wade checked Lila's bandages and reapplied the salve to her burns, his touch as gentle as it had been the night before. The burns were blistering but did not appear to be infected, which was a relief. Lila's breathing seemed easier today as well, though she still coughed occasionally. "Wade," Lila said as he finished wrapping fresh bandages around her palms, "I have been thinking about your offer." Wade's heart began to beat faster, but he kept his expression neutral. "And I want to accept it," Lila said, "but I need to understand what you mean by partnership. What exactly would that look like?" Wade had been thinking about this very question through the long hours of the night. "I was thinking I could move my operation here," he said slowly, working through the ideas as he spoke. "My land is not developed enough to support much yet anyway. Between your land and my labor, we could build something stronger than either of us could manage alone." "And legally?" Lila asked. "How would we protect both our interests?" "We could draw up a contract," Wade suggested. "Specify the terms, how the work and profits would be divided, what happens if one of us wants to leave the arrangement. We would take it to a lawyer in town, make it official and binding." Lila nodded slowly. "That sounds fair. But Wade, I need to be honest with you. The ranch is not doing well financially. I owe money on supplies, and with the barn gone, I am in even worse shape. You would be taking on my debt as well as my land." "How much debt?" Wade asked practically. Lila named a figure that made Wade wince internally, but it was not insurmountable. "I have some savings," he said. "Not enough to cover all of it, but enough to make a good start, and if we work hard, we can make the ranch profitable again. The land is good, you have water rights, and there is a market for cattle and horses if we can build up a decent herd." "You would risk your savings on me?" Lila asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "On a struggling ranch and a woman you barely know." "I would risk it on a partnership with someone I trust," Wade corrected. "And yes, I know it is fast, but sometimes you have to take chances in life. I have played it safe for years, saving every penny, taking no risks. And where has it gotten me? A tiny piece of land and a lonely existence. Maybe it is time to take a chance on something bigger." Lila felt warmth spread through her chest, a feeling that had nothing to do with the fire. "I do not want you to regret this." "I will not," Wade said with certainty. "The only thing I would regret is walking away and wondering what might have been." They spent the rest of the day planning, discussing ideas for the ranch, what needed to be done immediately, and what could wait until spring. Wade had a practical knowledge of ranching and construction, while Lila knew the land and the local market. Together, they began to sketch out a vision for what the Norton Ranch could become. As they worked, they continued to learn about each other. Wade discovered that Lila had a sharp mind for figures and planning, that she could calculate costs and profits in her head faster than he could with pencil and paper. Lila learned that Wade had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was comfortable, making her laugh despite the dire circumstances. The storm continued through that day and into the next night. They were trapped in the house together, but the forced proximity only seemed to deepen their connection. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories and dreams, debts and disappointments. Wade told her about a ranch he had worked in Wyoming where the owner had treated his hands fairly and with respect, how it had shaped his ideas about what kind of rancher he wanted to be. Lila shared her fear that she was not strong enough or smart enough to live up to her parents' legacy. "You are both those things," Wade assured her. "You just needed help, and there is no shame in that. Your parents would be proud of how hard you have fought to keep their dream alive." On the third day, the storm finally began to break. The wind died down, and the snow stopped falling, though the world outside was buried under several feet of fresh powder. Wade ventured outside to assess the damage and see if he could find any of Lila's horses. The barn was a complete loss, nothing but a pile of charred timber and ash covered in snow. But as Wade walked the property calling out, he was relieved to hear answering whinnies. 2 of Lila's 3 horses had survived, taking shelter in a small grove of trees on the far side of the property. They were cold and hungry but otherwise unharmed. The 3rd horse was nowhere to be found, and Wade feared it had not survived the combination of fire and storm. He led the 2 surviving horses back to the house, where Lila met him with tears of relief streaming down her face. They managed to get the animals into a small shed that had weathered the storm, giving them what feed and water they could spare. With the weather improving, Wade knew he needed to make a trip to town soon, both to file their partnership agreement and to purchase supplies. But first, they needed to ensure the property was secure, and that Lila would be safe if he left for a few days. They spent the next week working together to stabilize the situation. Wade repaired damage to the house and outbuildings, while Lila managed the domestic tasks as her hands healed. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the day and sitting by the fire at night, talking until the late hours. With each passing day, the connection between them grew stronger. Wade found himself watching Lila as she moved around the kitchen, admiring the graceful way she handled even mundane tasks despite her bandaged hands. He noticed the way the firelight brought out the gold in her brown eyes, the way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating on something difficult. Lila caught herself looking for Wade throughout the day, listening for his footsteps, finding excuses to be near him. She noticed the strength in his hands as he worked, the concentration on his face when he was building or repairing something, the way his voice softened when he spoke to the horses. It was Wade who finally acknowledged what was happening between them. They were sitting by the fire one evening, nearly 2 weeks after the barn fire, when he reached over and took her hand gently, careful of the healing burns. "Lila," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something, and I do not want you to feel pressured or obligated in any way. Our partnership agreement stands regardless of what I am about to say. Do you understand?" Lila's heart was racing. "I understand. I am falling in love with you," Wade said simply, his storm-gray eyes meeting hers directly. "I know it is fast. I know we have only really known each other for 2 weeks, but I cannot deny what I feel. You are strong and brave and intelligent, and being with you makes me happier than I have been in years. But if you do not feel the same way, that is fine. We can continue as business partners and friends, and I will never bring it up again." Lila felt as if all the air had been knocked out of her lungs, but in the most wonderful way. Joy bubbled up inside her, mixing with relief and excitement and a dozen other emotions she could not name. "Wade," she said, squeezing his hand gently, "I am falling in love with you too. I have been trying not to, telling myself it was too fast, too impractical, but I cannot help it. You make me feel safe and valued and understood in a way I never have before." The smile that spread across Wade's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. He raised her hand carefully to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, avoiding the bandaged parts. "May I kiss you properly?" he asked, his voice low and warm. "Yes," Lila breathed. Wade leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but Lila met him halfway. Their lips touched softly, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence and passion. It was a kiss that held all the emotion of the past 2 weeks, all the fear and relief and growing affection. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, their faces flushed. "I have wanted to do that since the first night," Wade admitted, his forehead resting against hers. "I am glad you waited until I was not covered in soot and ashes," Lila said with a laugh. They sat close together the rest of the evening, hands intertwined, making plans not just for the ranch but for their future together. It seemed natural, inevitable even, that their partnership would become something more permanent. When Wade suggested they should think about marriage once they had the ranch situation stabilized, Lila agreed without hesitation. "I do not want a long engagement," she said firmly. "We are both adults. We both know what we want. Life is too short and too uncertain to wait." "Then we will make it official as soon as possible," Wade promised. "Once I get to town and take care of the legal matters, we can talk to the preacher." The trip to town happened a week later, when the roads had cleared enough to make travel possible. Wade made the journey alone, allowing Lila to rest and continue recovering from her injuries. He returned 3 days later with a wagon full of supplies, legal documents establishing their business partnership, and a simple gold band he had purchased from the general store. He proposed properly that evening, getting down on one knee in front of the fire and asking Lila to be his wife. She said yes through happy tears, and he slipped the ring onto her finger, kissing her with all the love and passion he felt. They were married on a cold but clear day in February of 1884 by the preacher in Reno, with the general store owner and his wife serving as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony, nothing like the elaborate affairs that wealthier families might have had, but to Wade and Lila, it was perfect. They spoke their vows with voices full of emotion, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever hardships might come. After the ceremony, they returned to the ranch, which already felt more like home to Wade than anywhere he had ever lived. That night, as man and wife, they came together with tenderness and passion, discovering each other in the intimacy of marriage. Lila had been nervous, but Wade was patient and gentle, taking his time to ensure her comfort and pleasure. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, happy and content despite the hard work that still lay ahead. The rest of that winter and into spring, they worked tirelessly to rebuild the ranch. With Wade's savings and careful management, they were able to pay down the debt and begin purchasing lumber for a new barn. Wade proved to be an excellent carpenter, and with help from a few neighbors who were hired for day labor, they had the basic structure completed by late spring. They acquired more livestock, starting with cattle and adding chickens and pigs. Lila proved to have a talent for managing the finances, keeping meticulous records of every expense and income. Together, they made a formidable team, complementing each other's strengths and supporting each other through difficulties. By summer, the ranch was beginning to show real profit. The cattle were thriving on the rangeland, and they had bred several of the horses successfully. Wade's reputation as a fair and skilled rancher spread, and they began to receive offers to board and train horses for other ranchers in the area. Their personal life was equally fulfilling. The love that had sparked so quickly between them only grew deeper as they built their life together. Wade discovered that Lila had a playful side that emerged when she was happy and secure, teasing him and making him laugh. Lila learned that beneath Wade's serious exterior was a romantic heart, as he often surprised her with wildflowers or took her on evening rides to watch the sunset over the mountains. In the fall of 1884, Lila discovered she was pregnant. She told Wade one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the hills. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for, pure joy and excitement mixed with protective concern for her well-being. "We are going to be parents," he said wonderingly, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "I am going to be a father. "You will be a wonderful father," Lila assured him, covering his hand with her own. "This baby is so lucky to have you." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, despite some morning sickness early on. Wade was attentive and careful, taking on more of the physical labor and insisting that Lila rest whenever possible. As her belly grew through the winter months, they prepared a nursery in one of the upstairs bedrooms, with Wade building a cradle from oak wood and Lila sewing tiny clothes and blankets. Their son was born in May of 1885, during a gentle spring rainstorm. The labor was long and difficult, but the midwife from town guided Lila through it while Wade paced anxiously downstairs. When he finally heard the baby's first cry, he nearly collapsed with relief. "You have a healthy boy," the midwife called down to him. "Come meet your son." Wade took the stairs 2 at a time and entered the bedroom to find Lila propped up against pillows, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle in her arms. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy. "Wade, meet William," she said, using the full form of his name that he rarely went by. "I thought he should be named after his father." Wade approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at his son for the first time. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a surprising amount of dark hair. His tiny fist was pressed against his mouth, and his eyes were squeezed shut. Wade felt his heart expand in his chest, a surge of love so powerful it was almost painful. "He is perfect," Wade whispered, reaching out to stroke the baby's soft cheek with one gentle finger. "You are perfect. Thank you for giving me this." "We made him together," Lila reminded him with a tired smile. "Thank you for being here, for building this life with me." "I never thought I could be this happy." Wade leaned down to kiss her forehead, then her lips, a soft and reverent kiss. "I love you more than I can ever say." "I love you too," Lila replied. "Now, do you want to hold your son?" Wade carefully took the baby from her arms, cradling him with surprising confidence for a new father. William opened his eyes, revealing dark blue irises, and seemed to stare up at Wade with an expression of serious contemplation. "Hello, son," Wade said softly. "I am your father, and I promise to always protect you and love you and be the best father I can be. You are going to have a good life here. Your mother and I will make sure of it." As if in response, William yawned widely, then settled against Wade's chest, content and secure. Wade felt tears prick his own eyes as he stood there holding his son, overwhelmed by the miracle of it all. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch continued to prosper under Wade and Lila's careful management. They paid off all remaining debts and began to expand, purchasing additional land and increasing their herds. Their reputation grew, and the Norton Robbins Ranch, as it came to be known, became one of the most respected operations in the area. William grew into a bright, energetic child who loved following his father around the ranch and listening to his mother's stories. When he was 3, Lila gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Lucy. She had her father's blue-gray eyes and her mother's dark hair, and Wade doted on her shamelessly. 2 years later, another son arrived, whom they named Thomas after Lila's father. The house that had once seemed so lonely and empty was now filled with the sounds of children's laughter, the patter of small feet, and the organized chaos of a busy family life. Wade often thought back to that night in the blizzard, when he had seen the flames rising against the white snow and heard Lila's desperate cries for help. He thought about how easily he could have missed seeing the fire, how he could have arrived too late, how many things could have gone differently. And he thanked whatever providence had guided him to that place at that exact moment. "What are you thinking about?" Lila asked one evening. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset as their 3 children played in the yard under the supervision of a hired girl. It was the summer of 1890, 7 years since that fateful night. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Wade said, taking her hand in his. "About how my whole life changed in one night." "Our lives changed," Lila corrected with a smile. "You saved me in more ways than one, Wade, not just from the fire but from loneliness and despair and giving up on my dreams." "We saved each other," Wade said. "I was just as lost and lonely as you were. I just did not realize it until I met you." Lila leaned her head against his shoulder, content and peaceful. "Do you ever regret it? Taking on my debt, my struggling ranch, all of it?" "Never," Wade said firmly. "Not for a single moment. This is the life I was meant to have, with you and our children. Everything I went through before was just leading me to you." "I love you," Lila said softly. "I love you too," Wade replied, kissing the top of her head. "Always and forever." As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they sat together in comfortable silence. The children's laughter rang out across the yard, the horses nickered softly in the pasture, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. Life was not always easy. There were still hard seasons and difficult years, challenges to overcome and obstacles to face. But they faced everything together, as partners and lovers and best friends. The ranch continued to grow and thrive, becoming a legacy that would be passed down to their children and grandchildren. William grew up to be as skilled a rancher as his father, taking over more responsibilities as Wade grew older. Lucy surprised everyone by showing a talent for training horses, eventually running that part of the operation herself. Thomas, the youngest, developed a head for business and managed the financial side of things, ensuring the ranch remained profitable even as times changed, and the Old West began to fade into history. Wade and Lila grew old together on the ranch they had built from near ruins. They added onto the house over the years, built better barns and outbuildings, irrigated more land, and created a thriving operation that employed a dozen workers and their families. But more important than any of that was the love they had built, a love that had sparked in the most unlikely circumstances and grown stronger with each passing year. On winter evenings, when the snow fell softly outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, Wade would sometimes tell their grandchildren the story of how he and their grandmother had met. He would describe the burning barn and the raging blizzard, the desperate ride through fire and ice, the moment he first saw Lila trapped behind the flames. "Your grandmother was the bravest person I ever knew," he would say, his arm around Lila's shoulders. "She did not give up even when things seemed hopeless. And she taught me that sometimes the best things in life come from taking chances, from being willing to risk everything for what matters most." "Tell us about the kiss," the grandchildren would beg, and Wade would laugh and look at Lila, whose eyes would sparkle with remembered joy. "That kiss," he would say, "was the moment I knew for certain that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with this woman. And I have never regretted that decision, not for one single day." The years rolled on, bringing changes and challenges, joys and sorrows. They celebrated births and mourned deaths, danced at weddings and held grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Through it all, Wade and Lila remained each other's anchor and support, the love that had been forged in fire and ice proving strong enough to withstand anything life threw at them. When Wade passed away in 1923 at the age of 66, it was peacefully in his sleep, with Lila holding his hand. He had lived long enough to see the automobile replace the horse in many places, to see the Wild West he had known transformed into something more settled and civilized. But the ranch remained, a testament to everything he and Lila had built together. Lila lived for 3 more years, long enough to ensure that the ranch would continue in capable hands, that the legacy she and Wade had created would endure. She spent her final years surrounded by children and grandchildren, telling stories of the old days and making sure that no one forgot the love story that had started it all. When she finally passed, joining Wade in the small family cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch, it was with a peaceful smile on her face. She had lived a full and rich life, had known true love and real partnership, had seen her family grow and thrive. And she knew that somewhere, somehow, Wade was waiting for her, ready to take her hand once more and walk together into whatever came next. The Norton Robbins Ranch continued for generations, each one adding to and building upon what Wade and Lila had started. The story of how it all began, of the cowboy who rode through fire and ice to save the woman he would come to love, became family legend, passed down through the years as a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a single act of courage and compassion. The barn that Wade had helped rebuild still stood, modernized and expanded over the decades, but still fundamentally the same structure. On one of the main support beams, carved carefully into the wood where it would be preserved for posterity, were 2 sets of initials, W.R. and L.N., surrounded by a heart. Wade had carved it shortly after they were married, a permanent reminder of the love that had been born from tragedy and grown into something beautiful and lasting. And if you stood in that barn on a quiet winter evening when the snow was falling softly outside, you could almost imagine you heard the echo of laughter and voices from long ago, the sound of 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would outlast them both, a legacy of love that would never truly fade. Their story became more than just family history. It became a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope can be found. That sometimes the worst disasters can lead to the greatest blessings. That love, real and true love, can spring up in the most unexpected places and grow strong enough to weather any storm. The grandchildren who heard the story grew up believing in the power of courage and compassion, in taking chances on what matters most, in never giving up even when circumstances seem impossible. They told the story to their own children, and those children told their children, until it became woven into the very fabric of the family's identity. And always at the heart of the story was that image of Wade riding through the blizzard toward the burning barn, risking everything to save a woman he barely knew, not realizing that he was riding toward his own destiny, toward the love that would define the rest of his life. It was a love story worthy of the Wild West, as dramatic and sweeping as the landscape itself, as enduring as the mountains that surrounded the ranch. A story of fire and ice, courage and compassion, risk and reward. But most of all, it was a story of love, pure and simple and true, the kind of love that comes along once in a lifetime if you are lucky enough to recognize it and brave enough to reach for it. Wade and Lila had been that lucky and that brave. And the life they built together, the family they raised, the legacy they left behind, all stood as testament to the power of that one moment when a cowboy rode through fire and ice to save the woman who would become his everything, his partner, his love, his home. Their love story ended not with their deaths, but with the continuation of everything they had built, with each child born and each generation that followed, carrying forward the values and the love that Wade and Lila had exemplified. In that way, they never truly died. They lived on in the stories told around dinner tables, in the initials carved into that barn beam, in the land itself that still bore their names, in the hearts of everyone who came after them, and chose to honor their memory by living lives of courage, compassion, and love. And so the story of the cowboy who rode through fire and ice became immortal, passed down through the ages as a reminder of what truly matters in life, of what endures when everything else fades away. Love, family, home, the willingness to risk everything for what matters most. These were the lessons Wade and Lila had taught, not through words but through the lives they had lived and the example they had set. Their story was complete, their ending happy and fulfilled, their legacy secure. They had loved deeply and lived fully, had faced hardship and overcome it, had built something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. And in the end, that was all anyone could hope for, to be remembered not just for what they did but for how they loved, and to know that their love had made the world, or at least their small corner of it, a better place. The ranch they had saved and built together stood as a monument to that love, generations after they were gone. And every winter, when the snow fell heavy and the wind howled, and someone looked out across the white landscape toward the barns and outbuildings, they would remember. They would remember the night the barn burned, the cowboy who rode through both fire and ice, and the love story that had begun in the most dramatic and unlikely way possible. It was a story that deserved to be told and retold, remembered and celebrated, because it captured something essential about the human spirit, about our capacity for courage and sacrifice, about the transformative power of love. Wade and Lila had shown that even in the harshest circumstances, in the wild and unforgiving landscape of 1880s Nevada, two people could find each other, could build a life together, could create something lasting and beautiful. Their story had a beginning, in fire and ice and desperate courage. It had a middle, in hard work and growing love and the building of a family. And it had an ending, peaceful and fulfilled, surrounded by the fruits of their labor and the love of generations. It was a complete story, satisfying and whole, with nothing left unresolved or unfinished. And so we leave them there, in the family cemetery on the hill, side by side as they had been in life, watching over the ranch they had built and the family they had raised, their love story complete but never truly ending, living on in every person who heard their tale and chose to believe in the power of love, courage, and hope, even in the face of seemingly impossible odds.